Greetings up, Sanders. Dr. O here. And one thing I think it's important to remember when we're talking about all of these policies and everything, people talk about what Governor Abbott is doing is illegal. They talk about how, it's disrespectful and it's a smack in the face to the victims of the flooding, which is absolutely true. People talk about Trump's policies. He's an authoritarian. He's a dictator. We talk about all of that. He's going against the Constitution. Of course, all of that's true. Same with people like Ron DeSantis and the like. All of that stuff is true and needs to be discussed. But what's being lost from the conversation is that, particularly in the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, which is this year, what's happening is also racist. And that can't be lost. I hear people talk about, Trump's crackdown on as they say, quote unquote, illegal aliens, or if they say undocumented workers or undocumented people. You just run down the list of their name. Yeah, that's true. But you have to say black and brown immigrants, because who are here, who are undocumented, because the main people who have been, as the brother Congressman Frost said when he went to the concentration camp in Florida, he saw black and brown people from Latin American countries as well as Haitians. Okay, the majority of these people who are being abducted and taken up and snatched off the street are brown individuals, are Latinos. That's the number one group that is being targeted. And yes, followed by black people. And yes, there have been people like, the student with Mesa, from Tufts, who are Arab. Like, we know that there have been outliers within this. And of course, we've seen people like, Mahmoud Khalil, mainly over the Palestinian protests as well. But again, brown folks, and black folks. And for the media to ignore this is similar to the same thing they're doing with Trump and the economy. People are saying, as the economy starts to tank, oh, these guys voted for Trump because they thought he was going to save the economy. Like, that's the narrative that everybody's going with. And yes, some people voted for him for that, but a lot of people voted for him because of his racist policies, because of what he said he was going to do to black and brown communities. They voted for him because of his sexist policies, his homophobic policies. He is the man who ran on the culture wars, not Kamala Harris. They are not targeting white immigrants who are undocumented, like Irish undocumented immigrants in New York or groups in Arizona across the country. They're not doing that. And we can't just see that narrative that it was just all about the economy. When we look at what Abbott's doing, it's just not just about maintaining House power. It's about targeting black and brown communities, taking their voice, their votes. When you look at what happened with North Carolina and that Supreme Court justice, and that North Carolina court justice there, and she fought and she talked about how people who are parts of the army or the military were being targeted, who were overseas and the like. But she said specifically in districts that have majority black voters. Like, you cannot ignore that part of the narrative and be taken seriously by many of us. People talk about, oh, let's just talk about affordability. Every single day, these guys are implementing a racist agenda. And to not call that out, either people just don't think it's racist, haven't spent the time to look at the fact that it's racist, just want to focus on the fact that, Trump, DeSantis, Abbott, they all want to be dictators and so on and so forth. Yeah, but they're doing it on the backs of black and brown people. And that, from the voting suppression, like, run down the list, that cannot be ignored. And too many of these networks and too many of these commentators are ignoring that particular point. But it's not going to be ignored here. And even, within what they're doing with Trump and the redistricting efforts, they're the ones who are bringing up race. Democrats weren't bringing that up, but they acknowledged it, that this is what it is. How can you not look at who's being targeted? How can you look at who's being targeted and not come up with that conclusion? How can you look at who's being abducted on the streets and not come up with that conclusion? How can you look at what's being taken outside of the books from our schools and everything and not come to that conclusion? How can you look at the killing of things like DEI and the like, and the targeting of colleges and companies and so on and so forth, and not look at that conclusion? People need to be intellectually honest about this. This is a racist agenda coming from these governors, coming from these mayors, coming from the Justice Department, coming from the president. And to ignore that is to ignore America's history. But quite honestly, ignoring America's history is how we got here in the first place. And hopefully the tide will turn. I'm not going to hold my breath on it, though. But those of us with platforms in any way, shape, or form, I don't care you got 1 follower, 10 million followers, use your platform to speak the truth that so many people don't want to speak about, are afraid to speak about, because that's going to lead to a whole nother conversation that people are uncomfortable to have. This is why Glenn Singleton talked about the need to have those courageous conversations, because people don't want to have them. But we have to make sure that we have them here. Let me know what you think. Peace.